Hey bears! Hi! I'm Kelly Hargett. I'm the director of the Kernersville Museum. We are so excited that you guys decided to spend some of the 4th of July with us. As you guys know, we had a historic weekend. We opened up the time capsule. Friday night we had a concert here. And today we're getting to hang out in our historic village and have a history-making event because this is our first ever Storyteller Series. So I'm going to I want to tell you a little bit about the museum before I do that. You guys, our museum is open in downtown Kernersville Tuesday through Friday, 10 to 4, Saturday, 10 to 2. Admission is free. We are always looking for donations, artifact donations, monetary donations, whatever you want to do. That is how we get our exhibits. And we have a new exhibit up. It is the Decades exhibit. We would love for you guys to come out and check it out. It's Kernersville through the decades, all the cool things that make Kernersville Kernersville. So we would love for you guys to come out and check us out. If you haven't, take advantage of it. If you don't know, at Christmas time, this turns into an entire village. Rick and Beth Pierce helped last year create an entire winter wonderland out here. And where you're sitting right now turns into an ice skating rink. We have all kinds of magic. So just make sure you're checking out what we're doing. Keep up with us on Facebook so you can see what we're doing. And I'm gonna let David Fitzpatrick take it from here. Thank you.
Well, sort of like a reunion. So many familiar faces. William said, I want to make sure I recognize and acknowledge. Is everybody hear me first of all? No. Might be a little far away. Yes. How about now? Can everybody hear me now? Well, welcome to the Kernersville Museum, and it's a reunion. A lot of familiar faces, and in the next hour or so, we have 3 native sons of Kernersville. And they're going to share their Polaroid snapshot memories of Kernersville from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and I'm going to throw out a couple questions at the end. I understand that Miss Jenny led the time capsule yesterday when they brought it back up from 1971, and are there plans, Ms. Mayor, to have another time capsule? Did we dig one up and put one back in the ground? Have we done that yet?
What do you think?
Might be an idea, and I'm going to get these.
We're debating it and how we can best do it.
Maybe this time we should put it in the rafters.
We're going to put it up high. Yeah. Kind of fireproof box. Yeah.
What makes Kernersville special and unique is its people. It has always been the lifeline, the blood, and it really is like a reunion. And our native sons of Kernersville will have some stories to share. Gentlemen, go ahead and take your seats. Start your engines. Let me introduce our esteemed guest. I can tell real quick, I cannot move. If I move, I lose the mic. So that's going to be very hard for me, as active as I am. So I will sit down as well. First of all, let's start off with age. Dr. Danny Dillon. The first year of the baby boomers. How about it? He's an East Forsyth graduate, an NC State graduate, an Oklahoma State graduate, came back to Kernersville, started veterinary practice, and kept that going all the way through 2020. I see 2019. Danny, I see one of your sons made it today. That's very special. Chris is in the audience.
He's the short one.
Danny's first wife taught with me at Kernersville Elementary School, and now he's married to Sandy Engelbert and spends time biking and sailing and traveling and keeping up with 8 grandkids. Dr. Danny Dillon. Ned Mabe, 1966 graduate of East Forsyth, recognized in the Hall of Fame for his athletic endeavors. Married his high school sweetheart, Miss Carolyn is here. I think they've been married close to 53 years of marital bliss, we hope. One son, Daniel, and is very active. After 32 years in the finance business with Piedmont Federal and Southern Community, still finds time to give back to the community. Served on the Shepherd Center Board as president and Kernersville Lions Club and Kernersville Foundation as well. Ned Mabe. Brother William Hairston and I graduated from East Forsyth in 1976. Where did the time go, William? Yeah. William has 8 sisters and 2 brothers. William had the opportunity to read a letter that was buried in the time capsule yesterday, and it brought tears to me as well. It's neat that your parents find a way to still send a message to you, and they sent a heartfelt one to William. William attended Tennessee University. He was a track star, a football player. Ended up graduating at was it Winston-Salem State or Morristown? Winston-Salem State. Spent 37 years with Forsyth and Avant. His lovely wife of 44 years, Vanessa, is out in the audience, and they have 2 children. William Hairston. And 8 grandchildren. Make sure I put the grandchildren in. All right, guys, make sure you're mic'd up, because I'm getting ready to throw some questions at you. Are those mics working? Yeah, we're good. Okay, I'm going to start off. I've got 10 questions, and rapid fire sequence here. I want everybody to reflect on your perception, because you'll see the time spans and the decades, there's different responses. As the town of Kernersville has changed, and boy, has it ever changed. Let me just throw the first question at Ned Mabe. Ned Mabe, your youngest memory, how many stoplights were there in Kernersville?
My youngest memory was 2.
And how many restaurants did you know of?
1, 2, 3.
Tell me where the 2 stoplights were, because I can remember when there was 3. Tell me where there were 2.
Main Street and Mountain, and at the school.
Main Street, Mountain, right here,
Right here,
and right at the school.
at the school. That was only 2 I remember.
Got it. Let's start off, since it is the 4th of July. Perhaps the first question should be, Kernersville has always found a way to celebrate this day, because it is all about one's freedom. And Kernersville, as far back has made it a special effort through the town and Chamber of Commerce to find ways to celebrate. Danny, what are your fondest memories of the 4th of July?
Well, for me, I had a pony. So the big thing on the 4th of July was to ride the pony in the parade. And we did that all through the 50s. My time frame is the 50s and the first half of the 60s. That was my childhood in Kernersville. So we started riding in the parade early. My dad made now you would call it a go-kart. We'd call them hot rods. But he made one. My brother rode one of those. So it was a big event for us to participate in the Kernersville parade. It always would end at the schoolhouse, and there would be rides there that you could participate in, and then you would always have a horse show behind the schoolhouse. And they also had entertainment. And my earliest memory of entertainment was one year they had in the old Kernersville School auditorium, a singer they promoted that was coming from Nashville to sing there. And I didn't know any names anyway. And I can remember the auditorium being full and even the windows up, and they had the side doors open so people could hear. But it was Little Miss Dynamite, Brenda Lee. And she was, I think, 12 or 13 years old when she did that. I can remember Dennis Weaver coming from, he was Chester then, from the Gunsmoke show. Gunsmoke was the #1 show in the late 90s. He came and did a little talk and actually bent his stiff leg and showed us that it would bend. I also remember, I remember Junior Samples from Eagle coming too, by the way. But anyway, those are my early memories. It was always to be in the parade and then do the horse show as well.
How about you, Ned?
Well, I borrowed my brother's bicycle. I didn't have a bike until I was 12 or 13. But I borrowed my brother's bicycle and put red, white, and blue stuff on it, and went and cut a piece of cardboard off of a cereal box and made me mufflers. So I rode in the parade one time. But my best memory of the 4th of July is two things. Carolyn, do you remember what we did 55 years ago today?
That you can talk about.
I was getting ready to go off to college, and money was tight in 1966. So on July the 4th, my family's tradition was we always dug potatoes on July the 4th. So after we dug the potatoes, I talked Carolyn into, we set out 2 acres of late tomatoes that year, but not thinking that I wouldn't be here when they came in, because they would, you'd start picking them in September, and I'd be away in school. So I got my granddad, who lived on Piney Grove Road. That's where I was raised. In fact, Danny and I lived, I don't call it a street, we lived across the road from each other for about 3 or 4 years. He was a truck farmer. Does everybody know what a truck farmer is? He raised vegetables and stuff like that. They used to, I don't know whether they even use that term anymore or not, but it was called a truck farmer. But anyway, I talked my dad into picking, my granddad into picking those tomatoes. And at that time, there was Mustin's, Charlie Snow's, Bass's Cafe. Anybody ever heard of Bass's Cafe? He picked tomatoes and sold to those places. Of course, Mustin's was not where it's at now. It was beside of the old W.C. Stafford store. And even then, he sold tomatoes for $10 a bushel in 1966. And he would pick them and send me half. Well, half was pretty good money back in '66. So that's the two things that I remember about 4th of July.
How about you, William?
Well, my fondest and earliest memory of 4th of July in Kernersville was about, I guess, 7 or 8 years old. But it was so many of us that we had to hold hands to keep the little ones, the little Hairstons, from running in the parade actually. And one of my favorite moments was we always took a big bag, all 8 or 10 of us. We'd take a big bag and fill it up with candy. I mean, I think everybody would throw about 20 pounds of candy. So we came back home every 4th of July with enough candy to last us to after Christmas. Even though my daddy worked at the drugstore and got a discount on candy, we never had to buy any. But, you know, Kernersville is known for pretty much world-class 4th of Julys for a small town. I mean, everybody in town literally came out, and my memory was always seeing neighbors and friends and store owners and everybody out celebrating the 4th of July. And I did that until I guess I was 17 and left to go to school, and came back, and my children enjoyed the 4th of July's in Kernersville. So that's my fondest and my latest.
Let's talk education. Danny, you were going to Kernersville School, and then they built another school. Tell the folks about that whole process, and then I really want to hear from William 10 years later, and what happens when integration happens in school, and in segregation, because it happened, yes, here in Kernersville as well. Tell us about going from Kernersville School to East Forsyth.
Well, as far as schools go, Kernersville School defined Kernersville. The whole community really functioned around Kernersville School. Now I'm talking about before 1962. All the events, the athletic events, if you got on a bus and it ended up at Kernersville School, you were part of Kernersville. And at that time, the buses carried the first grader and the 12th grader. Everybody got on the same bus, we ended up at the same place, and the students were the drivers. They might be juniors, they might be seniors, but they drove the buses. And so it was a situation where on the bus, you know, third graders were not going to get in a fight because a sixth grader would stop it. And sixth graders were not going to get in a fight because a 12th grader would stop it. The only thing we had to worry about was the 12th graders fighting. And that's the only one I ever remember having a fight on the bus was the seniors. So anyway, I was in that situation all the way through the 50s, and then in 1962, I was a freshman at Kernersville High School. And that's a pivotal year in Kernersville because that was the last graduating class from Kernersville High School. It was 1962. I was a freshman in 1962, which meant in the fall of 1962, when East Forsyth opened, I went into East Forsyth as a sophomore and graduated in 1965. I was in the first class to go all the way through East Forsyth. And it was a big change, and you can almost mark the change in Kernersville in that era in 1962 because there was an identity change. East Forsyth took students from Walkertown, Glen, and Kernersville, and even though the Kernersville people still supported it, it was not that hub that used to be Kernersville High School. So that was a change. Going to East Forsyth was exciting. I'll be honest, it was exciting. Everybody, I remember the parents talking about, man, there's going to be fights over there because there was such a rivalry between Glen, Walkertown, and Kernersville. But it didn't happen. Our principal, Fred Lewis, was very good at getting everybody in the school, kind of started and going on the same page. Kernersville back then was, I would say, just solid middle class. We did not have a lot of diversity. Everybody was either coming in from the farm area around town or they worked in the textile mills in the town. So it was, everybody was kind of in the same boat. If you went to church, you went to churches, to the ones in Kernersville, and not, you just didn't go to church. I only remember going to school with one Catholic person. I only remember going to school with one person from another country, and he was from Cuba. So we were all a homogenous group, you might say. And so it was easy. I think that made the transition somewhat easier. Now things changed once we got to East. But East Forsyth for me, I thoroughly enjoyed it. The teachers I had at Kernersville School and at East, you know, at my age, you look back on that and you say, those are my heroes.
William, let's talk. Obviously, you did not have that opportunity that Ned and Danny and I had. When you started school, you didn't start here in Kernersville. Share with us that part of the segregation and then the transition back into Kernersville and that segregation era.
Okay. Well, I was born on the tail end of segregation. The first 2 years, when I started school, first of all, my mother sent me to school a year early and they didn't catch it. So I graduated from high school at 17. But the first 2 years of my grade was spent at Carver, which at that time was a 1 through 12 school. So the first 2 years was spent there. In my third grade year, the laws of the land changed and schools were desegregated. And in the third grade, I attended Kernersville Elementary with all my neighbors and friends that I grew up with and couldn't go to school with the first 2 years. Our principal was James Fitzpatrick, our moderator's daddy. Mr. Fitzpatrick was a wonderful man, but he was very stern. And he was always one that valued education. And I spent as much time in Mr. Fitzpatrick's office as I did in the classroom. And eventually Mr. Fitzpatrick said, he said, Hairston, he called me Hairston, he said, Hairston, you can't learn nothing in here. You need to be in the classroom. He said, now I'm gonna have to talk with your daddy, and I begged him not to. That I would change my ways. And I did. And so from that point on, I went on and from Kernersville to Kernersville Junior High. And from there, there was a law that changed again, and we were bused for diversity. So the Kernersville kids, this time I'm with everybody that I lived in the community with. We were bused to Carver in the, the 9th and 10th. 9th and 10th grade. And from there, I mean, you had Kernersville kids. I think the Glenn kids went to Atkins. But, we all, the Kernersville kids, we played sports at Carver, and then I ended up 11th and 12th at East, where we had some of the best sports teams in the state of North Carolina. Our football team came within one game of winning the state championship in 1975. And so my years, when I started, my years were just wonderful because Kernersville never really reflected the segregation times that I started school in. Kernersville was always a wonderful town. Everybody knew everybody, the generations back, and that's how my early start in education was, and it ended great. So
The year was 66 or 67, and as we have said, there were a lot of changes going on in our country, and particularly with education and integration. And I remember the first African American teacher that came to Kernersville Elementary School was Ida Powell. And I didn't know it at the time. I was in 3rd grade, and she was a 3rd grade teacher, and the principal's son was in her room. I didn't know that he was sending a message to the community. And Miss Powell turned to Miss Kathy, she got married, and I was invited about 5 years ago to her 80th birthday party. And it just means so much to me, and that acceptance. And I remember my pop would get phone calls from parents. Why are you having my child into that classroom where that teacher is a teacher of color? And he'd always in the line, he says, well, ma'am, my son's in that classroom, and he's no special as anybody else. I didn't realize the message that he was sending to the community. And I think Kernersville fared very well in that process and in that transition. William touched on athletics, and let's talk about, because Kernersville is truly a hotbed for sports, and we have for years had great programs. Obviously, when William and I were going to school, you've got the state baseball championship back in the 50s. In the 90s, you had a state football team. And 2 years ago, we had back-to-back winners in 4A football. Did it, Mabe? Reflect back, 2 of the best athletes that you ever saw from this town.
One I never knew. I read about him, was Kemp Wicker. He played for the New York Yankees, I think, and pitched in the World Series. I never met him, never knew him, but I just knew of him. I knew one of his children. But the other best athlete, all-around athlete, was a guy named Punk Eccles. I don't know whether anybody remembers Punk or not. He could play baseball, basketball, football. It didn't matter what it was. He could play it, and he always made all conference every year in every sport. But I will tell you about the Winfrey twins. Anybody know Jerry and Terry? One of them just died, I think. But anyway, a funny story about Coach Blaylock. And I hope I'm not stepping on anybody's toes, but they were playing, I think, Mineral Springs. And both of those guys were good athletes. But one of them, the better one, had 3 fouls on him at halftime. So at halftime, Blaylock had them switch jerseys because you couldn't tell them apart. So the one that had 3 fouls now had no fouls. And they went, I think they were playing Mineral Springs. So that's just a funny sports story that Coach Blaylock was involved with.
How about you, Danny?
Well, as far as athletics go, I can go back to Little League. That was the end of my athletic career. I was unlike Ned. But my neighbor, Coy Vance, many of you probably know him, had the CWA Little League team, and he was next door, and we had a practice field in our cow pasture that was set up to play, but I was on his team simply because I could get a ride to practice and to the ball games. And one of the things I remember about playing Little League at that time was that there were no parents hardly there. It was just kids and the coach. And if there was problems, it got worked out among the kids and the coaches. There were no fights of parents in the stands or anything like that. There may be a grandfather or two there, or they may be 1 or 2 parents. My dad only came to 1 game, and the umpire didn't show up, so they made him the umpire. So that's kind of the way it was back then. One other story about the Little League, though, is Coy liked for us to play ball, obviously, and there was a little league right here in Kernersville. But he had some friends in East Bend, so he decided that we would play East Bend, his team. And so his father had a cow truck with slats and a gate on the back of it that they hauled cows or pigs in. And he got that thing out, got us all dressed up in our 4 or 5 bats that we had, and loaded us all into the back of that truck and locked the door in the back. And we went off to East Bend. And that was a pretty good trek for a 50s Dodge truck at that time. But we had a good, I mean, there was no place to sit. We were standing shoulder to shoulder, and there were 12 kids in the back of a little pickup truck. So, but we played ball, had a great time, came back home, and I just thought about it recently. Even though that was the end of my athletic career, I was on a travel ball team.
Oh, wow. Before they even had travel ball. Now we know where it came from. That cattle truck from the 50s. William, some of the greatest athletes of your generation.
Okay, well, I grew up in Kernersville, Little League, and played with a number of outstanding baseball players. Two actually come to mind is young Ronald Osborne and Mike Hope. Mike ended up pitching with the Dodgers minor leagues, and of course my Little League baseball coach was Ronald Osborne, and so he played in the Cleveland Indians organization, and he was a great fundamental coach, and there was just so many of us. Rod was a shortstop and had one of the strongest arms that I have ever seen for a 12, 14-year-old kid. And baseball, I think I quit playing baseball at about 14, but at 12, the Kernersville Raiders Little League team came to town. The first year, I was 12 years old, the same year that the time capsule was put in the ground. And Jerry Royals was our coach in football. So there was a lot of great football players that came off the Kernersville Raiders Little League team, and I love football, and I was selected as an all-star from Kernersville in the very first Tacoma Bowl football game at Bowman Gray Stadium. Now, how awesome is that? A 13-year-old playing in Bowman Gray Stadium that was reserved for high schoolers. It was awesome because everybody in Kernersville, I mean, if you wanted to rob a house in Kernersville, wait till Friday night. Because the whole town would be at these games. And being selected as an all-star from Kernersville, in that very first Tacoma Bowl, I was fortunate enough to win the MVP in that very first Tacoma Bowl. And that Monday, John Ed Staples called my daddy and said, have Junior down here at the news office Monday morning. I guess my daddy took me to school. But he, that's one of the most memorable just things representing Kernersville and seeing, what a close-knit community we were. And, it didn't matter. I mean, we were a close-knit community. As I say, I lived about less than 2 miles that way on the other side of the track, but both sides of the tracks were represented of Kernersville. And David, I'm sorry I got a little sidetracked, but I had to get the story in. I love Kernersville, and Kernersville athletes and athletics is among the best in the state. So.
And that's football, and that's basketball, and that's baseball. I mean, we are well-rounded. We do have soccer. I mean, look at to what the town has done to provide facilities for all of us so that we can continue that proud tradition. Danny, you mentioned earlier that you said, the teachers were your heroes in your life. There always is that one. There is always that one educator that you look back on, and it made a unbelievable turning point, positive difference in your life. How about sharing with our folks today who that special person was and what that person did to motivate you?
That could be kind of hard. I will choose one simply because he said one. Teachers then, they didn't just teach the subject. They taught you about life lessons. And I was in the 5th grade. My teacher was Margaret Jones, and she drove over here from Winston-Salem. And I didn't figure this out until much later in life. But, back in the 50s, not everybody went to college. But she called me up to her desk one day, and I had done poorly on a test. And she was calling me out for that. And then she turned around and looked at me and said, you can do better than this. You could go to college. And it was a seed. This planted a seed that I didn't even realize was being planted at the time. And looking back on that many years later, from then on, it was almost like into my mind, I was assuming I was going to college. I only knew 2 people that had, quote, been to college or went to college. And so there were many other teachers that had significant impressions on me. But I will leave it with Margaret Jones.
Yeah, Mabe.
The one that comes to mind for me is Cornelia Adams. And a lot of you know Cornelia Adams. She was Charlie Snow's sister. I think she was the historian for the school, Moravian Church. But anyway, I had her for the 6th grade. And she was a very competitive person, but she didn't want people to know it. So we were playing Mr. Potts' class for the 6th grade baseball championship. And she called us guys over and she says, now look, we're going to play fair, we're going to play hard, but we're going to win. I mean, that's the way she... So, of course, we beat Mr. Potts' class, and she was very patient. She was very... she taught me competition, but to be competitive, but be patient in competition. At my 50th high school reunion, her daughter came up to me. Oh, by the way, we signed a baseball for her, the whole team. It was like 11 of us. At my 50th high school reunion, her daughter came up to me and she handed me a baseball and she said, my mom would want you to have this. So I have that baseball today. So she was very, very good.
Thank you. William?
Oh, this is very easy for me. The teacher that had the biggest life effect on me was Shirley Snow. She was my 4th grade teacher. I mean, a wonderful teacher, a wonderful motivator, and just a wonderful person. You know, after Mr. Fitz finished with me, Miss Snow was very patient with me. she was very patient. She would say, now William, I want you to sit still. Now you can talk after class. But to this day, she is my very favorite teacher. And I saw her yesterday, and the last 50 years when I see her, she always hugs me. And one day we were in CNH and I had my 4 granddaughters with me. And she said, to my granddaughter, she said, your granddaddy was my favorite student. And they looked at me like, really? But I love that lady, and you know, I can't see her without hugging her and just telling her the effect that she had on me as I grew and as I got older. I knew really how special that was. That was 2 years after I was allowed to go to Kernersville. And this lady was just so kind, so sweet, and really what teachers should be with bad students. But I love her, and she, you know, she's my favorite of all time.
We were in 4th grade together, and I love Miss Snow. She still comes into the grill this day, and I announce her arrival into the grill to let everybody in the grill know, here comes my 4th grade teacher, and I love her grill. Well, Mayberry has their colorful character, Otis, Ernest T. Bass. You know, there's some interesting and colorful folks that have, we got to be careful here with the defamation suits. we won't mention names in this next question and answering period, but Nate, I'm going to let you lead off with some interesting events and colorful characters that you've seen along the way in your years here at Kernersville.
Well, the one that stands out the most is there used to be a gentleman who would push his wheelbarrow down Main Street with a shotgun in it. And he would stop at the stoplight, sit it down, get a signal, and turn whichever way he was going. So, and then we had one guy who used to, and Danny will probably know who I'm talking about here, in the 4th of July parade, I can't remember whether it was a white mule or a white horse, but he would ride backwards on the white horse or the white mule the entire way, and don't know whether he was inebriated or not, but I think people were taking bets on that. But those are the 2 most. Oh, and we had, I'll tell this one.
Yeah, you've got a couple more. You need to go a couple more. Just don't say the name, okay?
I don't know who you're talking about.
Yeah, I think you do, but go ahead.
Well, we had we had one that walked in the 4th of July parade on stilts. He was Uncle Sam and did it for years. And I only know of him falling once. The little girl, he said, or little boy, came up to him when he was standing and grabbed a hold of grabbed both legs, and the only thing he could do was fall, so he fell. But that's about it.
Well, that was Moyer Wicker, and you can see.
I can say Moyer Wicker.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And one funny story about Moyer, and a lot of y'all know this lady that I'm going to mention. Margaret Burks had an 80th birthday party at her house on Hastings Drive. And Moyer was there, and of course, Margaret's a character too. And I tell her that. She calls me a jackass all the time. So. And a lot of you probably the same way. I was asked to speak at her 80th birthday party. So it came my time, and I said, I was just talking to Moyer Wicker, and I asked Moyer what year Margaret was born, and he said he didn't know, but he knew that when she was born, Pilot Mountain was 3 foot tall. So. That's about it.
A true, colorful character of Kernersville, for sure. God rest Moyer Wicker. Danny?
He stole mine. No, I was thinking about athletics, and my early memories of athletics were, going to the ball games. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the 1957 baseball team. I was at those games when they beat Williamston, I believe. And also in 58. 58 was an interesting year when they played Red Springs. My granddaddy was Granddaddy Beeson, worked at the post office, and he asked me if I would like to go to Red Springs and see the state baseball championship. And of course I agreed to go. What I didn't know is who I was going with. So this is in the 50s. Going to Red Springs was like a cross-country event. But I went with my granddaddy. I think John Vance was in there, and Pete Nash, and one other guy. And I can't remember, I think he was from the post office. But I know I sat on the hump. And going from Kernersville to Red Springs, you got an education. All you had to do was be quiet and listen. But I say all that to say, in athletics in Kernersville, when I would go to games, especially basketball games, Moyer Wicker, it was worth the price of admission just to go hear Moyer dress down a referee. Those poor referees would want to leave at halftime because he could stand up and do that, and he would. And Moyer was not above calling the coaches out too if he thought they weren't doing their job. I've got a 1962 annual there, and if you look on page 95, you'll see Carl Clark, our coach of football, walking up off the field with a bunch of expletives saying to the fans, "Moyer, this is my team, I will coach it." And Moyer's name is in the annual too. So I can talk about Moyer because I miss him. I always liked him. And no matter if I saw him at the hardware store or where, it was always a treat just to hear a story from Moyer Wicker.
How about you?
Well, David, you said not to call any of the characters' names, but I guess I can call him his name because I didn't know what his real name was, and that was Doodah Lamar. As a child, my daddy forbid us, but everybody knows where Jink Bulls was. Me, as a child, me and my friend Malcolm Warren and some others, we would go and stand outside Jink Bulls, and Doodah would come out, and man, he would put on the show. He would put on a show worthy of sitting there and watching and laughing. But that's pretty much the biggest character from Kernersville that I can remember was Doodah Lamar.
we've talked a lot about characters and education and athletics, but we take for granted a lot of times just how unique this town is. You know, Charlie had on the menu, it's the biggest little town in North Carolina. You know, it is the heart of the triad. It is the heart, and it is about the heart and soul of the people. That's my perspective. I'd like for each of you gentlemen to address what you think it is. What are the ingredients that make this such a special place? A special place so that we all came back to live our lives here. William?
Well, yeah, I can go back to the time that I played football again. Kernersville didn't have a Bantam team. And Kernersville has always been family to me, whether it was the Osborns, the Penixes, but I remember this story, and Joe's told it a bunch of times. When he and Johnny was growing up in Kernersville, there was no golf courses in Kernersville, and my daddy used to take Joe and Johnny to play golf. Okay, that was a generation. Later, Rod Osborne and I were the only two kids from Kernersville that played for Mineral Springs, and Joe turned around, Joe Penix turned around and drove Rodney Osborne and I 3 days a week to Mineral Springs. You know, and I'll never forget it. You know, it's just like my daddy did this and he's doing this for Rod and I. And I'll just never forget that. I'll never forget Kernersville being a part of my family. I had a small business here. For some odd reason, I decided to run a cab in Kernersville. And I never knew you couldn't make any money doing that. So when I did this, you had to go before the Board of Aldermen to get permission and get a vote. So I was about 20 minutes late, and I thought, oh my Lord. As soon as I walked in, Roger Swisher looked up and said, Junior, you don't need to worry about it. We already took care of it. Go on and start your cab. And I was so embarrassed because everybody, it must have been 200 people in that fire department where they held the meetings, and I was just so embarrassed. I just ducked my head and walked out. You know, but again, that was family. Kernersville to me has always been family, on that side of the track or this side of the track. You know, and you know, it was nothing to me as a 9 or 10-year-old to come home and see Roger on my mom and daddy's front porch talking. You know, it was nothing to me to come home from practice and see Grady Stockton on my mama and daddy's porch. So, you know, I only have fond memories of this town and growing up in this town and still having the privilege to see all these people that I've known my whole life. So that is very special to me.
And heartfelt.
And hard.
Ned?
By the way, Grady Stockton was the chief of police at that time, so we don't know what he was actually doing.
Grady was. And he was found up by
It's just the people. Through work related, I lived in Statesville for a while. I lived in Johnson City, Tennessee for a while. When I was in school, Carol and I were married. We lived in Cullowhee, but we always came back to Kernersville. Even though I worked in Winston or Greensboro, I had to live in Kernersville. We were talking the other day, our first apartment was a basement apartment from Wig Biles. I don't know whether you remember Wig Biles or not, but he had a lot of rental property. $45 a month we paid for a basement apartment. And we had to paint it, and we got the first month free. He gave us the paint. So it's just the people here that make you want to come back. And what else can I say? I'm still here.
How about you, Danny? What's the attraction?
Well, I agree with Ned. It's the people. The people cared about each other. I can think of an incident back in the 50s. You know, the old Farmers Hardware used to be beside the railroad track. I think Liberty Tax or something like that is there now. But the street beside the hardware was dirt. I think they put oil on it to keep the dust down. And when you went to the hardware, you actually pulled in perpendicular to the railroad track, got out, and went into the hardware. I went to the hardware one Saturday morning with my dad, and while we were in there, another car came to, obviously going to park at the same place, perpendicular to the railroad tracks there. That car had about 4 or 5 kids in it, and the driver, the man got out to go across the street to, let's say, get an adult beverage, and left the kids in the car. Well, while they were in the car, the train decided to come down the track. And this individual had pulled too close to the railroad track. And so when the train came by, the train was hitting the front bumper of that car. And it was bouncing, and you know, I'm not sure if the kids thought it was a fun ride or if they were scared to death or what. But I can just remember all of us come running out of the hardware to get these kids out of the car. Or I didn't do that, but the adults did. And they were concerned about them, and I think that's the type of concern. It wasn't that you just watch something like that or let it happen. I think about all the churches that used to work together at Christmas time to meet the needs of families and those that maybe did not have a good Christmas coming. In the 50s, if it snowed a lot, they blocked off Adams Millis Hill. And I think that's Burke Street now, but if you turn down off Bodenheimer on Burke Street, there was a steep hill there. And they would block that street off for sledding and build a fire at the top. And you could go over there. All of us kids went over there at night, and well, not obviously everyone, but a lot did, from Kernersville. And it would just be the people from Kernersville School and sled. And I was thinking back, you know, I'm not sure who blocked the streets off. I don't think it was the police. I think it was just the kids blocked it off. But the police never came and said, no, you can't do that. There was no vote at the Board of Aldermen meeting to block this street off or anything like that. The folks just did it, and the police came by and took care of us. But that type of attitude, we're all in this together, and we're going to look out for each other. I think that's one of the things that makes the town special.
I've just got one follow-up on that. As I said, David's father was our principal. My son's assistant principal was David Fitzpatrick. And my son had the same temperament of all Hairstons. He liked to talk. So he spent a little time, that's 2 generations, spending time with Fitzpatricks. But my son, David, I don't think David gave him corporal punishment like his daddy gave me. But third was in, I think, the 4th grade. And David talked to him. David talked to his teachers and looked at what was going on. And third was basically a straight A student. He just finished quick and disrupted the class. So David talked to Vanessa and I a long time ago, and he said, well, you know what, I want to challenge this kid. So third was in the 4th grade, but David elevated him to 5th grade work at Moore Elementary. And we found out through David not tagging him as a troublemaker, but challenging him. We found out that our son had a gift in science and math, and to this day he's he went to North Carolina State, and he's an electrical engineer due to what David did, you know, and that's what you call family and looking out. And my wife and I will always be grateful to him for him recognizing our son's capability. So that, again, is a Kernersville thing, you know, and that, again, is why this town and the people of this town are so special to us, and why we're all a big family. So, thank you, David.
Thank you. Sometimes you can't get rid of those Fitzpatricks. Pop would go through, and then when I went to Kernersville Elementary School, probably 2/3 of the staff were teachers that my pop had hired, and it was interesting, and so many fond memories. And I was, like Neil Stockton, fortunate enough to follow in the footsteps. And you know, they say, Thomas Wolfe says you can never go back home again, but he's wrong. You can go back home. I mean, there's a lot to go back home to, and gosh, a lot of special memories. But I'll tell you one thing, I ended up in the office a lot too. And it got to the point, this was second grade. And this was Pop's first year as the principal, and he got me in that office. He says, "Son, you're embarrassing me. We're going to take care of this." Joe Smith was the barber right there beside Charlie Snow's. And that's back when they used the straight razor to do the shaving, the neck and the face. So Pop made a deal with Joe Smith to get that barber belt. And that would hang right beside the refrigerator at home. And let me tell you, my pop spanked everybody in Kernersville, including his son, and I got it twice as much as everybody else. Let's, a couple more questions. I know time is short, but we've talked about kindness, about giving back. Are there any other stories, just like William came up with, where you saw that single act, that random act of kindness that was just incredible? At the moment somebody reacted, Danny talked about the train coming on the tracks. Any other stories come to mind, gentlemen? Ned?
Well, I was in Charlie Snow's one morning, and I was working at Piedmont Federal, so this was in 1980. And this family came in, man, his wife, and 2 kids. And they sat in a booth. That's when they had booths back then. And they ordered water. That's all they ordered. And the waitress went back and she said, "No, that's all we can afford." So Charlie went back and he said, "Each one of you can have 2 eggs, any style, bacon or sausage, coffee or water." And the lady spoke up and said, "I want country ham." So he says, again, you can have two eggs any style, bacon or sausage, coffee, and water. But I want country ham. So he didn't ask anymore. He went and he fixed everybody 2 eggs. And as they got ready to leave, I started laughing. If you remember, Charlie used to sell cigarettes, and they were behind on a thing up there. The lady wanted to buy a pack of cigarettes, and Charlie refused to sell her a pack of cigarettes. But at least her kids got something to eat that day. But I thought it was funny, and he told her, "Don't you ever come back in this establishment again," and I probably not. But that was an act of kindness, and also a reckoning too, I think, but when she said, "I want country ham," I thought Charlie would lose it. Speaking of Charlie, I've sat behind on the stools there early in the morning, and and he'd say, "I wonder if this grill is hot enough." And he'd spit on the grill and it would, "Yep, it's hot enough." I mean, he's done that.
Disclaimer, we do not do that.
What was 1947 was the year? Yeah.
You were mentioning a story that about an auction that happened. Yeah. While Ned's recollecting that thought, William, go right ahead.
Okay. Random acts of kindness. I witnessed that the entire time that I worked at Penix Drugstore. On the square since 1904, and I had the privilege of working there through high school. And the kindness that was shown to me that Joe and Johnny would allow me to come from football practice at East and work about an hour. I would clean the bathrooms real quick, vacuum, go upstairs and take care of all of that. And I watched a number of times that people would come into that drugstore and fell short of the money for their medicines. And Joe and Johnny and Miss Joyce and Linda Venable, there was, I guess, a rule passed down from Joe and Johnny's granddaddy: don't charge them if they ain't got money, give them the medicine. So, I mean, kindness was spewing from the Penix building for as long as I can remember. And, you know, that was, that's something that I'll never forget, and that's why, you know, the Penixes are blessed people because of those acts of kindness, not to one or two people, but to an entire community. So that's one of mine.
I just thought of what David was talking about. Spiro's used to be across the street from Charlie Snow's. Is it the, it was Bill's Restaurant after that? Is it a bakery now? Okay.
No.
Okay, but anyway, that was Spiro's. Spiro Carrillo, I think, was the Greek guy that owned that. And he served alcoholic beverages. And a bunch of guys were in there one night. I wasn't, because my parents wouldn't, if they'd have known I'd gone in there, they'd have killed me. But anyway, somebody came in and said a family had just gotten burned out. Their house had just caught on fire. They'd lost everything they had. Everything was gone. And one of the, I know who it is, but I'm not going to say, one of the people in there grabbed a honey bun. Everybody know what a honey bun is? And they made an agreement for whatever he got for that, everybody in there would match that. So he raised $200 by auctioning off a honey bun, and they took the money to the family that had gotten burned out that night. So a lot of good things happened in Kernersville.
Danny?
Ned and I are covering the same area, obviously, but, you know, I remember Charlie Snow saying, I don't serve food, I serve people. And I always remembered that, because that was his attitude about dealing with people, and he did look after people. And the same thing I saw happen over at Spiro's. If somebody didn't have money and was hungry, they could go in there and he would feed them. And never expect to get anything back from it. But both of those places, I think, set an example that, for the town. And as far as Spiro's go, his granddaughter was in my class in school, and when it would snow, one of the things I got in charge of, since my dad had a truck, would be to go around and pick up all my friends and go sledding or whatever. And Spiro's was one of the last places in town at night to close when it had snowed. And you could always go in there on your way home and probably get a hot dog. As Ned said, they did serve beer in there, and a lot of times the guys would get out of work and go in there, even at lunch, and have their lunch and get a beer. But both of those guys took care of people that needed food to eat, and I think that's commendable for our town.
It's that hour. I hear the church bell ringing. But I'd like to end with this challenge to our three speakers. Yesterday we dug up the time capsule of 50 years. Have you read what your mom and your dad wrote to you? And so now, if you had the opportunity to put something in that time capsule that was to be open 50 years from now, what would be that message that you would send not only to your family, but to the next generation of folks that love and care as much of Kernersville as we do?
Well, yeah, first, David, yeah, it would be an expression of love and hope for the future. Kernersville has lasted 250 years with neighbors like the people out there. So my message to my grandchildren and unborn great-grandchildren would be how Kernersville shaped me, and not sure that any of them will ever live in Kernersville, but I would guarantee you that they will know about their grandfather's Kernersville roots and how Kernersville was a wonderful family town, and Kernersville people took care of Kernersville people. As my daddy put in that letter to me and my sisters and brothers, always be kind. That's the motto, I guess, from the people of Kernersville, because everybody in Kernersville is kind, and always kind to each other, always acknowledge each other. And as my daddy would say, always put God first. That's what I would put in there as a future message for those that are behind me 50 years from now.
How about you, Ned?
3 words: never give up. I think would be what I would put in there, because with this pandemic that we've just gone through, I mean, it's just throwing things at our younger generation, and they're bombarded by all this. Never give up. It's always going to get better.
Final message, Dan.
I would say something to the effect of work hard, treat others like you would want to be treated, and develop a faith in your fellow man and God.
And thank you guys for coming out today. Thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your wisdom, your tidbits, your knowledge. And Kelly, thank you for this opportunity. Thanks, man.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you to Rick and Beth Pierce. Rick has worked really hard to get guys here and start this series. So we appreciate it. And you guys stay tuned, because we'll have more stuff coming here at the museum, and we would love to see you all come back. Thank you. How is it?
That defines my childhood.
Any more problems?
That glue should go all the way to the back. That glue inside should go there. We go all the way to the back.
What did it mean? Did it mean who was that? Williams. Williams.